Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first Housing Overview and Scrutiny of the municipal year. I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome all officers and to welcome all members. Looking forward to a robust year where we are challenging and combative when we need to be, and hopefully warm and supportive where possible. I want to thank all members who responded to my email regarding suggestions for the work plan. Councillor Lydiard, who's asked for an item on value for money, which is coming. Councillor Spate, who's asked for an item on the PHI, which is coming later next year. I've added an item on mental health and the links with housing. I think we're missing the item on the complaint system, Jenny. If we could try and slip that in there somewhere. I've spoken to Ian Wake, who has agreed with the committee that it would be a really good idea for us to have a walkabout sometime over the summer to visit some of the estates with some of the higher complaint levels and also some of the higher complement levels, so we can have a look firsthand at some of the things we're doing. And I've also spoken to the Chairman of Planning, Transport and Regen regarding a task and finish group into our capacity to either directly or to indirectly help deliver new houses in the borough. I think it's something that's vitally important for us to look at. And you'll see at the back of the agenda that there's now an action log that I've asked for. So after every meeting, committee can track the recommendations that we are making to see how they are being followed through on. I'd like to especially thank Jenny and Evelina. You'll see this evening there is a pink paper, but obviously we don't want to exclude the public where possible. And I know a huge amount of running around and work was done beforehand to make sure a part of the appropriate part of the debate can be held in public. So for officers who had to do a huge amount of work, it is greatly appreciated. So let's move on to the formal agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence. Aren't any apologies, Jenny?
Thank you, Chair. Just an apology from Councillor Spielman.
Wonderful. Minutes, anyone have any comments on the minutes of the 7th of March? Okay, we'll take those as accurate record. Item 3, urgent items. I've not agreed to the consideration of any urgent items. Item 4, declaration of interest. Does anyone want to declare that they are interesting? Ms Hodgson. Sorry, could you use your microphone, please?
I actually serve on the Mayor's panel, which I get expenses for.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Wonderful. Okay, we come to our first item, which is item 5 on your agenda, which is the terms of reference. Does anyone have any comments on the terms of reference? I wondered, Jenny, I had a conversation with the Chief Operating Officer of Health Watch the other day, and she said she'd be quite interested if she could have a standing invite to the meeting. Unless anyone objects to that? Yeah, please. Okay, we'll move on from terms of reference to item 6, houses of multiple occupation. Mr. Ahmed, are we going first, or Evelina, how do you like to do things? Do you like to briefly introduce? Okay, wonderful.
Thank you, Chair. Not so much briefly introduce, I'll leave it to Dalal. However, this is a report. Previously, it was a briefing note, and it was requested by members of the committee to bring it as a full report. We've learned a little bit from the way the briefing note was received last time. Therefore, I asked Dalal to prepare a bit of a presentation to just take the members through just the initial what HMOs are, what HMOs are not, so that it makes the discussion potentially on the report a little bit easier. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelina. Thanks, Jenny. So in terms of my presentation, I'm going to talk to you about...
So could you lower your... Oh, wonderful, thank you.
I'm going to talk to members this evening about houses and multi-occupation. So I'm Dalal Ahmed, I'm the Housing Enforcement Manager. And the topics for discussion is what is a HMO, the different types of HMOs, which is important to understand under the two schemes that we license, the difference between licensable HMOs and non-licensable HMOs, and then I'm happy to take any other questions before I go through the report. So the first question is really open to members. what do you understand what a HMO is? Yeah, because it just informs the conversation about HMOs.
Councillor Redstall?
I think if we've read the agenda, we know exactly what they are. You've just put it in paper, so we know what, you know. I don't think we're stupid, any of us. Yeah,
Oh,
you've made a clear report, so we know what they are.
Lydia?
I mean, I must admit, I did have to read through it 3 times, and there's different levels of HMOs, and the reason why we have HMOs is to house a lot of our single people, which is growing as the years go on. Yeah, so I did get into the agenda quite well at the end of the day.
thank you. Okay, so a HMO is made up of 3 or more people. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. 3 or more people forming 2 or more households. Now, a HMO is, apart from people sharing the rooms, they also have to share facilities, which is normally the bathroom and the kitchen. A HMO has to be their main place of residence. Sometimes we have some accommodation which is allegedly used as a HMO, maybe used by contractors that don't actually live in the accommodation as their main home, because obviously they're here working, but that isn't what we would class as a house of multiple occupation. Rent has to be payable by the tenant of the house to a landlord or to someone in control or management of the property. HMO could be a house, it could be a flat, or it could be a self-contained unit in a converted building. A household is defined as either a single person or members of the same household. So that could include husband, wife, children. And then lastly, a cohabitating couple count as one household. So that's what, in terms of HMO, that's what we would class as a HMO. Now, the different types of HMOs, Jenny. So we license under the mandatory HMO licensing scheme, and that was introduced under the Housing Act back in 2006. And again, it's the same definition as what is under the what is a HMO. It's 5 or more people forming 2 or more households. Tenants have to pay rent in a HMO. The person who's in control of the HMO has to apply for a license from the council. The property must meet minimum standards in terms of bedroom spaces and also the number of facilities for the number of people in the property. So as an example, for people who are sharing a house between 1 and 5 people, the average room size we would expect would be 7 square metres. So that, in feet, that would be 7 by 10 or 10 by 7. And in terms of bathrooms, if we have 5 people sharing, we would expect to have bathroom and a toilet in one room and a separate toilet. If it's less than 5 people, it would just be a bathroom toilet in one room. So that's so you understand in terms of that's the amenity standards that we would expect in a HMO. And lastly, the landlord or the person in control of the HMO must pass and fit a proper test. In terms of the offences that we look for, it has to have unspec convictions in relation to offences such as fraud, dishonesty, sexual offences, it could be drug offences, violence, and other offences that it might have contravened in relation to Landlord and Tenant Act, or it might be a banned landlord who might have received a banning order. In terms of additional licensing, now we introduced this scheme back in 2019. Each council has got discretionary power to introduce this under the Housing Act 2004. It applies to small HMOs. So in the report, I talk about the small HMO, and that groups people from 3 to 4 people. Tenants have to pay rent, and again, the person in control has to apply for a licence. As before, it can include houses, flats, converted buildings. And as before, we apply the same space standards, and again, the landlord must pass a fit and proper test. In terms of the non-licensable HMOs, and these are the ones, so the team would go out and investigate all allegations of HMOs. And sometimes when we go out and carry out our inspections, we identify this list of properties which don't require a licence from the council. So that could be a house which is just shared by one family. It could be properties that are either managed by local authorities, housing associations, health, police or fire services, or religious buildings. It could be, we get allegations that regarding hostels or care homes for vulnerable people. They would not require a licence from the council. It could be an owner, landlord living in a property with 2 lodgers. Again, that type of property would not require a licence. If it's got landlord and 3 people living in the property, then that would be different. Small HMOs in the non-additional licensing areas, those properties would not require a licence from the council. But what we're planning to do in 2024, we're looking to review additional licensing and make the case for extending licence across the whole of the borough so it's consistent. Currently, the government is looking under some new legislation to exempt HMOs which are going to be contracted to the Home Office for asylum seekers for up to 2 years, which could affect the council in terms of number of properties that we go out, licence and inspect. And also, as I've mentioned before, bed and breakfast rooms where you have contractors staying over. We often get many complaints regarding why are those properties not licensed, and it's for the reason we said. They may be shared facilities, but they're not. It's not their main and principal home. Thank you. So in terms of, I'm happy to take any questions, but if not, then I'll proceed to the report.
Councillor Lydiard?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your report. Interested to know why was it only the west of the borough had licensing arrangements for sort of medium-sized HMOs and not the east of the borough?
Sure. So in terms of back in 2018, when we produced the original evidence file, all the data indicated that that was the areas where we had the highest concentration of HMOs. Subsequently, we've found more properties in the other areas. So that's the plan why we wish to extend it across the whole of the borough.
Councillor Shernick?
Oh, hello there. I've received several complaints about the poor state of HMO rooms. What steps do you take to check rooms and how often are they checked?
So in terms of when we receive a complaint, officers would go out and we would normally inspect under Part 1 inspection. So that's a health and safety rating system, and we would identify hazards in the dwelling. So there are 29 hazards that we could identify, ranging from excess cold, damp or mould, and so on. And then officers would identify what the hazard is, what's the cause, and then obviously we would advise the landlord to carry out repair work needed to make that hazard eliminated or mitigate or reduced. In terms of how often we visit, we would carry on visiting the property until the repair has been carried out. We would, if it's sent out in writing, they would get an advisory note. If it's a non-licensable HMO, it's the same process from licensable to non-licensable.
I've got another question, is that all right? On 1.2, Thurrock has a 5-year target on house building. Does the financial state of the council impact on house building?
In terms of this report, oh, sorry, could you ask the question again? Sorry. Please.
Yeah. Right. Thurrock has a 5-year target on house building.
Yeah.
Does the financial state of the council impact on house building?
It might be more appropriate for me to answer that this question, Councillor Sinek, if I may, Chair. There are various considerations. As you know, there is a review of capital programme, and we are each time looking at best value that could be achieved, and everything is done on the basis of a business case. So it is absolutely, we will try and deliver where we can and build new houses. It is absolutely our ambition to do so, but we absolutely have to go through that business case and make sure that what we're delivering is achievable.
Councillor Spate.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. I'm quite intrigued by recommendation 1.2, where it says the committee notes the local household need for one-bedroom properties in the borough and it has increased in line with Thurrock's population growth. Well, that's great. Thank you for that fact. We're asked to note that fact. To what point? If you're going to bring things like that to committee and note what is something really, really important, surely there has to be something more constructive behind it. I would be really interested to know, for example, as the experts in the field, as to how you feel the council could tackle this problem that we do not have enough one-bedroom properties. You could share that information with us. We could share that with other colleagues, for example, in planning. So when they sit down and discuss Section 106 requirements and what they expect from building developers when they come into the borough, they're clued in as to what we need. But, I mean, just to note a single fact in a report, you know, we may as well say we noted 100 bus went past the window. The idea surely is that your expertise will inform us as councillors to help with the important decisions that this borough has got to make. And, you know, I really would like to see when reports come to us like this. I mean, I don't know when next a report on HMOs is going to come forward or a report on the PRS, but, you know, please, can you think about what you can bring constructively to that meeting to inform us and help us? We rely on you. We rely on your expert knowledge. And it would really be nice to have more information. I mean, I'm happy to note that we've got a problem that we haven't got, you know, but I would really like to say, and this is what we're going to do about it. Thank you.
So in terms of the context behind the number of one-bedroom properties that are needed in the borough, the background to that was at the previous Housing Committee meeting, there was issues raised around controlling the number of HMOs. Now, in the body of the report, what I tried to explain is that the population has increased, and particularly in terms of the lower age group, and the fact that we're not building sufficient number of properties to meet that demand by stopping or not allowing HMOs to grow within the area would have a negative impact on people in the borough. And I think that was, I was trying to explain that within the body of the report. So I know, you know, for next time, if I'm going to make a statement, make sure it's, like you said, backed up.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's an erudite explanation of where we are. And it is a criticism, of course it is. But as I say, look, going forward, we want to try and improve the way that we do things. And I would welcome perhaps a briefing from yourself. I don't sit on planning, but I do talk to planning councillors to share your knowledge and your ideas about how we can actually attack this problem from the whole council, not just from within this committee. Thank you for that explanation.
Thank you.
I appreciate we've now lapsed into the report and past the presentation. The question I had, it was actually linked to the recommendation itself regarding just noting the one-bedroom properties. We know we've got an economic problem in the borough with proliferation of properties that, you know, below band D is not a net contributor to the council treasury. And we know that HMOs do increase the population without necessarily increasing the tax take that pay for the services. Would it not therefore follow true that one of the things that housing should be putting pressure on in terms of planning and regeneration is looking at how the local plan needs to skew itself harder and further in the direction of some of the larger family properties to counterbalance the fact that we do have a proliferation of HMOs? Because ultimately, even with a licensing scheme, our ability to restrain the growth of HMOs is relatively limited legally. And if we get into a situation where HMOs grow and grow and grow and grow, we know economically that's not particularly helpful to, well, certainly the council outside the HRA. So is this not something, an area where perhaps housing needs to bring a bit of pressure to bear on wider parts of the regeneration function to try and counterbalance the HMO economic deficit, for the lack of a better term?
I could take that if I may, Chair. I think you're making a really good point. It's a matter of influence and sharing information based on evidence. So we do work very closely with our colleagues in planning. I think the matter being debated here definitely raises its profile, and it's something that we absolutely are happy to take away and influence even more, to say that obviously committee notes that there is imbalance and that perhaps more should be done in order to deliver the properties for smaller households or one-person households. So thank you for that.
So just in line with what Councillor Spate was saying in terms of, you know, tangible recommendation from the committee, there must be a way for us to extrapolate a formula that if we know what the general trend of growth is with smaller HMOs, there should be a counterbalance in terms of what we would suggest need to be a consequential growth of bands, for example, E, G properties, to offset the financial burden of having smaller properties that aren't paying in the same amount as larger properties. There must be a methodology that we can arrive at that, surely.
Yeah, we can absolutely have a crack at that. It's obviously this is a we didn't necessarily come with that in mind, but you're absolutely right. The evidence suggests that there is a need, and obviously within the council, by raising its profile, we will absolutely do our utmost to influence those making decisions on planning committee as well.
So can we have a crack at that then? Oh, we've got the first thing for our recommendation log, Jenny. So, Councillor Redser, were you in?
Thank
you.
you.
Pardon.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's quite worrying to how the HMOs have grown over the last 5 years. To me, that's worrying. I know I listened to planning the other night, and I think there was 10 properties in Stamford, one bedroom, that went through. It's worrying to me to think that there's youngsters waiting to buy their own home, and that's going to be taken over by HMOs, maybe, because it's people that actually buy these properties and then rent them out. So that's worrying to me. You've said in 10.5 that HMOs are an important part of housing supply. I'm not too sure about that. It's whether we need them or we don't. It's what they're actually bringing in to us, because I think the most people that are making money out of that are the people that are buying the homes to rent them out. It's not actually, unless they come up for licensing, it's not bringing any money into us. Can I just mention on page 28, you've got 10.2, you've got alleged HMOs 970 and number of homes required a licence 48. Could you just give me some more clarity on that? So I know we did ask this before when it came up.
Thank you. So this question came up at the last committee meeting, and it was in relation to what is the total number of HMOs that we've investigated since the scheme came into force, the additional licensing scheme, came into force. So the total number is 970, of which we've filtered down to 525 based on second and third data match checks. And then after that, we've carried out the 198 property checks, of which out of that, quarter of that of those properties required a licence following our inspection, and the remaining properties were found that they were not they didn't require a licence because they're in a non-additional licensing area, and 130 of those properties were found to be just family lets. And if I just wanted to add to that, in terms of the actions that have been taken by the team, within the report in section 8.3 and 9.2, it demonstrates the team's outputs in terms of enforcement action that we've carried out, which is very strong, and also 9.2 is the level of civil penalty income that we've generated.
Thanks. The word I have trouble with is alleged. You know, that means we don't really know. You know, we may have them, we may not. Before you said it was staffing problems you had, and then you managed to do more than the quota. Have you got staff in place now to try and get these down, the numbers?
So in terms of staffing, we've got 3 vacancies within the team now, and we're hoping to fill those vacancies in August. So we've offered offers of employment to new candidates, and we're just waiting for the reference checks to be processed, and so that they can start. In terms of suspected HMOs, in terms of this number will increase and decrease throughout the year based on new reports, but also in terms of how often we refresh the data. So there's always data coming in that we would look at and then match it across other data sets. And the other data sets that I make reference to is council tax experience check, electoral roll register checks. So there's a number of other checks that we data match. What we don't do, because a lot of this work is intelligence-led, we don't just visit a property without carrying out the checks, because it isn't an efficient use of staff time.
Through you, Chair. When they obviously become licensed, are they exempt from council tax, or do they have to pay the council tax as well?
So for HMO properties, it's the owner is liable for council tax, not the individuals in the property.
But the owner of the property has to pay council tax,
correct,
yeah?
Correct.
Because this, if we can, these alleged 970, that's a lot of money, isn't it? We could bring in to the borough. I won't go on about that, because obviously you'll come back to us next time, and I hope that's, a different figure there. I just really want to know why we are becoming a borough of many, many HMOs. Do other boroughs have the same as us, or are we? Because we seem to be getting more and more and more. I mean, we had one before Christmas that came up in one street. It was 10 in one street. We got that taken away because that was going to alter the street scene of the area. And if we're allowing that to come in to one street, 10 houses, that's an awful lot. I just wonder why we're getting so many.
So in terms of the number, the actual number of suspected HMOs has gone down to 327. The top figure I gave you was the number that we started from back in 2019. Just to clarify that in terms of the numbers, and like I said, that this number during the course of the year will increase and decrease. There will always be a source of data. Otherwise, if there isn't suspected HMOs, then at a point there will be no requirement for officers to go out other than just to do rechecks of properties. So there are always some landlords who may choose to evade licensing, or there may be tenants of the property that may lease the property to other people to help pay for the rent. The growth of the market has largely been driven by economics, people's affordability, where they're not unable to purchase at home, unable to access the council's register. So that's what's really grown the HMO market. Where in the private rented sector and the HMO market, we may see changes because with increases in taxation, interest rates, we may see some landlords exit the market. However, there's no indicators in the borough so far to indicate that we have seen a decrease. What we have seen over the last 10 years in the borough is a big growth of the private rented sector, which makes it attractive for investors to invest in the borough, because the local population has increased, and also, as we all know, the borough is very close to London. It's got excellent transport links, so it makes it a good choice for renters to rent in our borough, which again puts pressure on local people, as we know.
I understand where you're coming from. I know that, but sometimes people will look at that as it's stopping people from buying homes in Thurrock. You use that word again, and I'm not having a go at you at all. But when you said suspected again, you know, I want to see a bit more, it will be or it won't be, you know, a bit more positive in what's going to happen. I hope perhaps when it comes back to us, we'll see a bit more positivity if you're going to have 3 more people employed. Thank you.
Councillor Spate.
Yes, thank you. Forgive me if I got it wrong. You mentioned the number of investigative officers that you had. I believe you said 3. Was that correct? That I find quite concerning, given the fact that the current number of HMOs, Joy's wording aside, the suspected HMOs is 327. Each officer undertakes approximately 40 investigations a year, so you're going to get the best part of, if my maths is right, 120 investigations done a year with your team. We've currently got 327 suspect properties. We're never going to catch up, are we?
So in terms of the plan, for the new starters, we normally in a year do 2 action days, and that action days entails ourselves and other partners coming out and do door knocking exercises. So in terms of the number, we hope to at least do maybe 150 visits over a course of a week.
Right, I don't quite follow you then, but the question that I was going to follow up with was, you may not wish to answer this, but are the resources that your department needs to do its job effectively and properly to the benefit of the borough? Do you believe that you have the requisite resources? And if not, could this committee lean on whoever it needs to be leaned on to make sure that you get the help that you've got to do your job properly? And I'm not suggesting you're not doing your job properly, I'm suggesting you're under-resourced.
It's probably more appropriate for me to take that one since I am in charge of that department. We could always do with more resources, that's the reality. I think in terms of the size of the population of the borough and the size of the private sector, we're probably okay in terms of resources. We've got a good record as well of actually enforcing against landlords that are not necessarily following and sticking to all the regulations and rules there. We could be better at shouting about it, because obviously this is sending a good message out there. If you want to be that type of landlord, we will find you. There is also, I think, a good story to be told around those officers that have left. There's always a career progression. There's always a good story behind it. So we're a good borough to actually get people to upskill and have good careers. But as you know, we could always do with more. It's a difficult area, but I'm hoping that with those newcomers, we will absolutely get on top of those lists. But as Dalal is saying, they'll be fluctuating. There'll be new properties coming in. There'll be properties coming off that have been investigated. And we actually do work quite well with those that live in HMOs. See, my colleagues here that will be talking to you about the hostel are very keen to say that in terms of allocating and finding housing options, there are good housing options for single people where there is no other option sometimes. So they're not always bad. We actually look at all possible housing options, smaller houses, bigger houses, as sort of a range that we require in order to secure accommodation for people. So we look at them as a positive as well.
That's great to hear, and as I say, I think sometimes officers and the public get the feeling that all councillors want to do is shout and bawl at officers, and certainly some of the media do, and I would take a vested interest in that, obviously. But you know, as I say, I think it's really important to recognise that we do have some great officers in Thurrock. We do have some great amounts of work done, and indeed in our pre-meeting today, some of the work that was done in advance of this meeting definitely get praise from the members here this evening. So, you know, you're not alone. You're not fighting a lone battle. We're all in this together. And from myself personally, thank you for the work that you're doing. As I say, we hopefully will be able to help you, and then you'll help us.
Councillor Redstone.
Anyone mention Evelina knows I will give praise where it's due, and when it's not, I won't. But I think I just wanted to mention, as Evelina said about enforcement, enforcement's fine if you've got the staff there to enforce it. And we don't seem to have, especially in planning enforcement, we haven't got those staff to deal with the planning enforcement we've got now. So I just need to know how you're going to get through that, having that enforcement in place.
I could take that away to colleagues in planning, but and pass that on. And I think that the points around planning are also quite vital. And I guess it goes back to the other point around the one but need. It's the influence, because it's relatively easy to get a planning permission for HMO. It really is. So it's also influencing the change of regulation actually around that. That would make it a little bit cumbersome for those coming to the market to convert those properties. But thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Diard?
Thanks, Chair. In 10.7, you mentioned the council has systems in place to administer licensing. Are they recognised sort of IT systems?
The system, we have a licensing module on our uniform system. So we've got obviously the IT technology, and we're also this year launching our own e-form so that landlords can complete a HMO application direct through the council rather than going via the government gov.uk website. And also sitting behind that, colleagues in payments obviously process our two-stage payment. So they're the systems we have in place, and obviously sitting behind all of that, we've got enforcement policies, we've got the tools for the officers to carry out enforcement action. So anyone who joins the team, there are set inductions, systems, tools that people need to carry out their work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Final comment from me. I think I would just like to encourage officers, if it is at all possible, to, as you look at encompassing the east of the borough in the licensing scheme, if there was a way to expedite it at all. Certainly when I sought re-election in 2018, HMO issues were not an issue that came up in my homestead seat. By the time I sought re-election again in 2022, it was an issue that was becoming increasingly prolific. We all know the telltale signs. You get the marked up registers where you have households that have got multiple names that you've never been able to speak to before, areas where parking problems are on the increase. I certainly understand why you chose to do what you did in 2018, because that's purely where the data was and that's where the focus had to be. I think that the issue in the east of the borough is an issue that's probably ramping up, like almost in a compound interest kind of way. So if there was a way to speed up the current timetable, I think for those of us who represent eastern seats, it would be quite welcome.
In terms of the programme, we're not able to launch a new scheme until the current scheme comes to an end next year. But what we will be doing is doing a review of the current scheme, which will form part of the evidence file for the new scheme, and that will go out for public consultation later this year. And we're hoping, as part of the evidence file, that we'll gather feedback from landlords, also from the public, but also from members in terms of their views around what is happening in the borough. So that plays an important part in terms of the evidence file.
Wonderful. Right, okay, right, so we move to recommendations 1.1 to 1.3, and I think we're just tweaking 1.2 to reflect the conversation we had regarding needing some information from housing about how how colleagues in regen, etc., need to plan to counterbalance the growth of HMOs. All agreed? Thank you very much. Right, moving on to procurement of repairs and planned maintenance housing contracts, item 7. Evelina, again, did you want to do a précis before Mohammed comes in, or?
This is probably okay for me to just leave it in Shahid's hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. My name is Mohammed Shahidullah. I'm the Repairs and Plan Maintenance Manager for Housing. I'm presenting the report to you this evening. It's sets out or outlines the proposed procurement of 2 housing repairs contracts which will be expiring in the next 12 to 18 months. These contracts can't be extended any further because we've already utilised the extension provisions that were embedded in within the existing contracts. The background and existing scope of services of both contracts are detailed in the report, which no doubt we'll have some conversations about. The main repairs contract is being recommended that we tender out for a 15-year contract period, which is a change to the existing contract period of 10 years. And I've set out the benefits and rationale for that within the main body of the report in paragraph 2.16. The procurement of these contracts have been discussed with a range of representatives and residents, particularly the Tenants Excellence Panel. And possibly, if I was to mark my own homework, I would say that I've not embedded within the report more strongly how we will involve the Tenants Excellence Panel in terms of the tender procurement and evaluation process, but there will be strong input from tenant reps and the Tenants Excellence Panel. The appraisal of all the options regarding both contracts and the procurement of those contracts are set out within the report in section 3. And I think I'll just hold it there, Chair. Thank you, and I welcome any comments and observations.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll kick off. I've got my head around why you'd gravitate towards 15 rather than 10 years, and in my mind it seems quite sensible and quite logical. I would say that I'm concerned, given the scale of the importance and also the value of the contracts we're talking about, I was concerned about how sparse the report was regarding a rear view look at the performance of the initial contracts. I mean, both 2.3 and 2.6 speak about how a new approach will bring the maximum cost efficiencies. And maximum cost efficiencies, just as a phrase, isn't exactly empirical justification for why we would do something. Again, as a matter of theory and principle, what is being suggested does seem correct to me, but I just don't feel that there's the evidence base here predicated on this is what we did with the last contract, this is what we think the contract did in terms of performance, value for money, satisfaction of residents, and this is why we're now going in this new direction. It just felt quite sparse to me. Just wondering if there's anything you can do to respond.
I welcome that comment, Chair. Thank you. It's worth remembering we're still sort of got another 18 months left to run the contract, and to give a robust snapshot of the contract in terms of its performance, tenant satisfactions, the performance against KPIs, I agree, perhaps that could be embedded more, but we still do have, it will be slightly skewed because obviously there's still 18 months left in the contract, and who knows what can happen to performance, who knows what could happen in the market in terms of inflation rates, construction price indices and such like. That data, though, will be embedded in part of the tender specification in terms of using the full analysis, as you put, Chair, the rear view, look back in terms of performance, satisfactions, key performance indicators. All of that will be embedded in the tender specification to invite potential bidders to propose how they will better in terms of tenant satisfaction, tenant performance of the contractors and their supply chain, and offer value for money efficiencies, as well as their investment proposals in terms of social value inputs, supply chain opportunities and such like. So that's because given that we are really at the start of the process, we're really starting at page 1 here. Coming to you this evening is to start that process to inform how we take forward all the procurement activities as well as the detailed specification that's yet to be worked out, because they can appreciate it's quite commercially sensitive to work with an incumbent contractor at the same time start detailing out what the new service specification will look like. There will be an overlap, clearly, but that's why we've started the process early to enable to bed those factors in. We do need to have a contractor in place by clearly by this time next year almost to allow any new service provider or contractor a minimum of 6 months to ramp up their mobilisation, set up all their site logistics, data transfer and such like. So we are really in the start of the process, but I do welcome your observation and comments. And any subsequent reports that I come back to committee on will highlight elements of that value for money, potential efficiencies, what levers we have with the market to try to get continuous improvement in terms of value for money as well.
I do appreciate that the contract has 18 months left to go and performance can change, as you say, but I mean, you would never naturally allow a contract to get to its, end stage of life before you judge its performance. And I know we're not agreeing a contract tonight, we're beginning a framework, but what concerns me about the lack of that rear view analysis is that with the best will in the world, this does send a message out to the market. Contractors will most probably watch this meeting and they will come to a view, whether correct or not, whether or not they're just taking anecdotal mood music, they will come to a view that perhaps we are considering the longevity of the contract more than we are actually considering past performance. And that will be something that perhaps will play a factor in their mind as they start to prepare their own speculative bids.
Would you like me to respond to your comment there? Okay. I don't totally agree with you because we will, as I've mentioned, the detailed specification will include what our expectations are in terms of service specification, in terms of how they will improve. So we will set out a suite of performance indices against what the past performance has been the past 10 years of the existing contract. And we'll be seeking absolute clarity in terms of how bidders will be improving on that performance with evidence. So if bidders say we are delivering contracts and services in another borough, and this is how we have nudged customer satisfaction, performance of our supply chain up to high 90% with evidence, that will be part of the tender specification. Quality, again, this will be under advice from procurement in terms of what quality and price ratio we will set as part of that tender. My own preference is not to set a very high bearing on price. We want to see the right quality. We are going to be facing greater regulation from the social housing regulator in terms of how we meet a whole suite of compliance requirements under new legislation. That will have to be factored within the specification. So bidders will have to, they will be submitting their bids against that specification, not against this report. I guess that's my key ask to you, is just to bear that in mind.
Councillor Spate?
Yeah, I think that the fact that you touched on time ties in quite nicely with what I've got to say. And may I beg the indulgence of the chair and members and reflect on my experience of the outsourced services provided by the companies currently contracted to Thurrock Council that are named in this report. Over a period of several years, in my capacity as a local journalist, I've been called on to visit many, many council social housing properties. And in particular, I've dealt with a number of complaints about Aaron, who provide gas services, and on many, many, many occasions, the general repairs and planned maintenance issues provided by Mears. I can't ever recall being contacted about communal and external decoration. I therefore have considerable first-hand knowledge of the level of service currently offered in Thurrock, and I'm deeply unhappy about the number of instances brought to my attention. This stems, I believe, from massive complacency within those two companies, and I believe that is a derivative of two things: poor management and poor diligence by Thurrock Borough Council, and the fact that these contracts are too long and the companies are not being held accountable. I could bring to the committee's attention a number of specific incidents, some that are quite shocking, but that would simply eat up the time that we have for deliberation. And I would ask members to accept my statement that there have been many instances where the level of workmanship has been poor, the level of customer service and engagement with tenants by the suppliers, and in some instances, Thurrock Council has been appalling. And what concerns me with the recommendations put before us today is that we're simply looking to get more of the same, rather than seek innovative, practical ways to improve the service to our residents. And my fundamental belief is that we go about this process in the wrong way. We're simply seeking to find the lowest base figure for an operation of a service, rather than value for money. We're handing control to companies that are motivated by maximising profit, rather than offering the best possible service to residents. And we're operating in the belief that long-term contracts are the best way forward. Have we learned nothing from experiences over the past 2 decades where we entered into extremely long and ultimately very expensive and unsuccessful strategic partnerships, partnerships like Vertex and their successor Serco, which ultimately cost this authority an additional 16 million, I believe, on top of the budgeted costs. The Europa contract, where we used a company to create an internal market with commercial partners, was generally regarded as a complete failure. And the Morrison contract, the precursor to the current deal with Mears, was shockingly inefficient and expensive. Are we really that much further ahead of the game? Happy for me to continue? Yeah. I appreciate a contract needs a reasonable length of time because external partners will need to make provision for their internal provision of services to TBC, but the narrative of procurement should not always be about the lowest cost base. It's also worth pointing out that should Mears make any resubmission when the tender is issued, they already have all the internal provision in place and is set up, so I hope that a bid from them would be expected to be substantially lower than competitors. I would also ask that a much greater quality of diligence is put in place. A lot of the people that we contract appear to mark their own homework. That is not acceptable. I have seen instances where work has been signed off as as adequate or complete by the supervisors from those companies when it clearly is not. I remember a floor where a man fell through it the following day after it had been signed off. And I have great concern about the practice of subcontracting work, which I believe is a major and significant problem. I have come across repair jobs where the work is not even being carried out by a subcontractor. It's been carried out by someone subcontracting to a subcontractor. It goes without saying this will mean it's a substandard job. It's a simple analogy. We pay a main contractor $5,000 for a refurbishment. They take the cash and subcontract it. Pay the second company $450 and pocket an immediate profit. The job includes materials and labour, so the second entity has to make savings or cuts in order to make a profit. That may result in 5 millimetres less thick piece of plastering, a cheaper plumbing joint, or a refurbished part rather than a new one, all chipping away at the quality of the job. And should the contract be moved on again to say for $4,000 a job, the cuts will run deeper. And be under no illusion, that happens. I have seen it. So there needs to be very firm rules and regulations brought in, and we have the opportunity to do that. There need to be stringent penalty clauses. I strongly suspect there are many instances where a job should last for a number of years, but the repair or improvement fails and the council ends up paying more in the long run because we have to fund the repair. Any tender should include a guarantee mechanism. I'm advised by a number of local businesses they have in the past offered prices for jobs at TBC that come with a lifetime or a 10-year guarantee. They do come at a slightly higher initial cost, but that's it. If it goes wrong, they fix it at their expense. So long term, in that instance, is much better than accepting the lowest bid with no guarantees. And I do think the council has a responsibility to look to local business. I'm sure that officer colleagues may smile and think me naive or simplistic, but I do believe there are significant changes available to us the way that we can do things. Rather than simply note these recommendations, I think we should challenge them in detail. And I would ask that a working group be set up to analyse all the options, including those that are not recommended. For once, as was said, we have a time window on our side, and a detailed examination of why and how our procurement policy was formed and how it could be improved is surely what is expected of us by the government and the commissioners and the people of Thurrock.
Thank you, Councillor Spoke. Evelina?
I really just wanted to say that it's obviously going to be difficult to respond to any such statement, and a lot of the named contractors are obviously not here either. This is a report on procurement of vital contracts, and obviously we'll engage in drafting those specifications. And I think Shahid does state that absolutely it is going to be going through engagement through our customer excellence panel and all that. Secondly, Mayor's in particular, I think we've got a request to do a visit to Mayor's office. They're very happy to facilitate that. They do that with every committee, and I think Councillor Lydiard, Councillor Retzel visited in the past, so we can have those conversations with them as well. And thirdly, this is not a report on performance of the current contractors. I think again, we spoke about how we can do that, and I think it's the value for money that we have penciled for later in the year, where we will be talking about a number of our contracts and how we measure performance. So other than that, I can't really respond to the statement.
If I may,
Councillor Spake.
may make one brief. I fully get what you say, and this isn't about necessarily going into the minutiae of detail of what's gone in the past. I was trying to give an understanding from my profound experiences of how bad things are, and they really are bad. And I can take you to many, many places and show you them. You can go to Mayor's head office, I'll take you to some flats. But that's not the point that I'm trying to make. The point that I'm trying to make is if you do what you always do, you get what you always get. And I think we have an opportunity here to completely review the procurement process. We can sit down, we can analyse it, we can call in outside experts on procurement who will tell us what best practice in industry and in other industries is. We can learn, and then we can make a decision. And we may have the same outcome. I'm not saying that won't happen, but if we don't look at how we can improve it, when are we ever going to improve it?
This is exactly the sort of conversation that we came here to have. This is the meaningful engagement before any procurement, so absolutely value that. Just for information for members of the committee, we do have professional procurement specialists working alongside with us on drafting the specification, on engaging with residents. We have already done a series of surveys with residents to find out what's important for residents, and we will absolutely continue working with that procurement specialist to take us through the entire procurement exercise, the tendering exercise, assessing the tenders, and that engagement. But the last comment is absolutely valuable, and that's why we come here. The previous one can't really answer.
No, but I do understand that the thrust of Councillor Spate's point that this is clearly not a report for us to agree everything that should be in the tender spec. However, the point that I think Councillor Spate does make very well is, I'm quite elderly compared to Councillor Spate in terms of how long I've been here for, and officers who all predated you, obviously you're far better than they were. I do remember the assurances around Morrison's contract, and certainly when I was first elected, it was reassurances around, I think it was Vertex back in 2010, and how some of the comments when this committee fell under HOSC, Health Overview and Scrutiny, how some of our comments were entirely unfounded. So I think this is just our attempt at making sure we have these conversations as early as humanly possible. So as we are going through the period, because as you say, you do need something in place for next year, that these are the conversations that we have to have now. Otherwise, we'll get to next year and find ourselves in far more of an antagonistic position. So did you just want to reply?
Sorry,
yeah, of course.
Just
Yeah, please.
to add to Evelina's point.
And then I'll come back to you, Councillor Redson.
Just to add, it's worth noting, as I said, the term of the contract, there will be break clauses if performance falls well below the required standards. So it's not as if we're giving an open checkbook to any contractor to say, here you are, run off with this for 15 years. There will be close performance management and control of that contract, and there will be break clauses. So there will be built-in processes and mechanisms to protect the interests of us as an authority and of our residents. And just on Evelina's point about the recruitment of a housing specialist procurement advisor, part of their role is to look at innovative techniques in the rest of housing, social housing provision up and down the country. They have exposure to a wide range of other landlords, social landlords, to tell us this is what counts as best practice. This is where this area is achieving high rates of customer satisfaction through the delivery of repairs and maintenance services through this process or mechanism. So that is already part of the process. And as I have said, Chair, we are at the very beginning of that process. We have got a lot of work to do for the next 12 months. Thank you.
Councillor Redson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for the report. Councillor Spate has hit on quite a few things. Us, as a few of us in here, have got long memories. We can remember back. And sometimes you can see the benefits of mayors and you see the good things that they've done, but also we as members are the first persons our residents get in touch with. we see the bad parts that don't get done, you know, or we're trying to fight something which we know is wrong and we can't get to that part. And you talked, Evelyn, about value for money. You know, you don't always get what you pay for, you know, and I think some residents feel that. That happened with Blackshots Flats. You know, the times 15 years I've been fighting for Blackshots Flats because they're in such a state of mould and God knows what in there that you wouldn't want any of your family to live in there because it is horrible. But mayors can go in and do, you know, and as we've heard many times, they've just gone over the top with some paint and then it's all come back again. So it's all those things that mayors does. But then I think the good things that mayors do is brilliant. But then, as Neil said, mayors pass out to contractors, and then it gets further and further away from mayors, and mayors don't really have any control over who's going out. So I think that's where we see, as members, we see the bad parts, you know, because we see what's not being done and what should be done. And I think a task and finish group, I think, would add to that. We can only add to the good work you're trying to do. You know, in that respect, I think we've got to be seen to be doing now. We've got a great area now, 18 months you say, we've got a good timeline which we can work to, you know, to fulfill that and get a better deal. I've got a long memory. I can go back to 3-4 contractors that it didn't work, you know. So this time we need to do it better. Thank you.
Councillor Shinnick?
Yeah, thank you. My question is, basically, I've been in many communal areas and the state of repair is awful. I just wondered, why don't caretakers or housing officers report these issues? Because it comes down to us as councillors to raise it, you know, and I should think that should be reported before it comes to us, you know.
Thank you, Chair. My understanding that there are estate audits and inspections of relevant areas. And obviously, our first priority is to make sure community areas are safe. That's got to be the first priority. I'm happy to have a follow-up conversation with you outside of this when you say they're in bad disrepair or they're not being cared for in the way they should be. I'm happy to come out and perhaps have a conversation with you, with colleagues in other sections that have the responsibility for carrying out the inspections, and then we can address the problem that way if that suits you. Okay.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lydiard.
Thanks, Chair. This contract potentially is sort of 150 million over 15 years. And as councillors, we're naturally very nervous because historically we could have done a little bit better. And I would like to be more involved. I would like to see a project plan with milestones. Before we sort of enter into any of those milestones, I would like to be in a position where I could ask all the right sort of questions to satisfy myself that it's working perfectly. I do feel sorry for you guys because as councillors, we only hear about the disasters. People don't come up to us and say, oh, they did a fantastic job last week. So we don't really know what percentage of those jobs that are done really well or done really badly. So I personally feel that we should have some sort of working group that would just have a light touch, an overall sort of view of what's going on, when it's happening, and so that we don't make any mistakes on our side or your side.
Councillor Lydiard. One thing I wanted to ask, it's kind of tangentially related to the paper. The paper obviously goes over the general framework that you want to go on to build. there's not a huge amount of commentary on ongoing compliance with the contract and how you monitor that. Now, compliance control is, you know, an incredibly difficult thing. I really do appreciate that. Obviously, I don't think anyone on committee would want to try and bind anyone's hands and say, you know, contractors shouldn't subcontract, because that's a natural mechanism of the marketplace. But of course, then the compliance becomes more difficult. Is that something that centrally the housing is supported by throughout the rest of the corporate team in the council, or is that something that purely falls on you? Because again, the contract is one thing, then the compliance becomes more difficult over time, I should imagine.
Thanks, Chair. Within housing, there's a central compliance team that have relevant sort of officers with the necessary technical skills, engineers and such like, who monitor all the compliance functions. Some of the contracts that my service oversees and delivers, we do monitor those. There are monthly meetings to ensure compliance with track. We do have to, obviously there's a HHSRS that we're regulated against and we have to report against. There will be, as part of the new social housing regulations that I highlighted earlier, league tables published next year, which will, I think, October 2024, which will highlight elements of tenant satisfaction, housing performance generally, but also how we rate in terms of compliance. I think we all appreciate since 2017 and the events after Grenfell, compliance in many areas, not just fire safety, were highly ramped up in all housing authorities. So yes, there is a central core function. There is attention, detail and resources put behind compliance. Where there is failures, they're highlighted, they're risk mitigated and managed, and we have to address that. So there is no real hiding place. I hope that answers your query.
Yeah, but the reason I asked is because I read an article a few days ago talking about the new regulations, and it was geared around the problem of subcontracting and how that can create a lag in data reply getting to local authorities. So you can actually have relatively green KPIs, but because there's a data lag between subcontractors then feeding back through the chain of command, it may skewer how some of the new regulations actually look. Is this something that we're particularly concerned about?
You okay for me to take that? Okay. Not overly concerned about. There is an issue, I agree, in terms of data lag, but that's down to how we, in part, how we make sure the relative IT systems, so while the contractor collects and reports the issue of certification, the validation of the compliance work, and then the monitoring within the relevant systems, we've got to make sure there's a seamless sort of reporting process right from the ground right through back up to the central systems that we maintain. So that will be part of the process when we come to tender out, is ensuring that any new IT systems, data management and performance systems are fully integrated. That will be part of the process. There'll be no hiding place because we will be reporting these statistics to the housing regulator and they will be published league tables on those. Okay.
It may be my ignorance of how housing works, but specifically with the subcontracting. So once we award a tender for farmer repairs, we know what farmer repairs is bound into because they won a tender on that basis. The point at which they subcontract, obviously we haven't ever acknowledged a subcontractor that they may choose to use. So when you're talking about the seamlessness of IT systems, you know, how much risk is there that poor performance is just swept up in what we can't see with subcontractors? We could end up with a fantastic primary contractor, but if that primary contractor then uses inferior subcontractors, then how much of our compliance then starts to creak at the seams?
I can take that if I may. I think there's something around compliance that maybe we're missing. So every compliance element will have a very often certificate to it. So whilst it might not necessarily be MERS, hypothetically, or there is a subcontractor to it, it's MERS' responsibility or main contractor's responsibility to provide that certificate. And we only record something as compliant, whether it's, you know, checking the lifts or checking the dry rises, once we've got in our possession as a landlord that certificate, and it's only at that point that we mark something like it's done. So we don't take it on the basis of somebody's gone and out and done it, or even maybe they put it through as a repair completed. We really wait for that evidence, and it's only when it's catalogued in our possession catalogued that we mark this as compliant. So I think this is the sort of the check and balance that we would always have in those compliance areas.
Yeah, just coming into this relatively fresh, it was the subcontracting area that worried me, because it's much easier through contractual mechanisms to punish a contractor that isn't complying. If you then have to punish the contractor to get them to punish the subcontractor, that seems a lot more convoluted and a lot more difficult to then war game in terms of how you keep the system running properly.
I just really wanted to, I mean, we're going off tangent a bit, but it might be interesting to inform the debate in terms of Mears in particular and their connection to the borough. Obviously, we know they've got the base here, they've got the supply chain here as well, they've got their sort of own warehouse where they buy sort of, or are in partnership to buy materials from. 55% of their workforce are actually residents in Thurrock, and another stat we've got 36% of suppliers are based in Thurrock, so these are your subcontractors, so 36% of them are in Thurrock. And we also keep a stat on, or a total of how much is spent through the suppliers on materials, subcontractors and equipment in terms of monetary value. So we monitor that month on month, and it's very important for us that the money is spent in Thurrock, the money is invested in Thurrock, and that the workforce is from Thurrock. And then obviously they've got the whole, as every contractor would have, a sort of program of social value where they then invest in the borough at the back of that. So I think that's we feel very confident about that with them, and there's a good kind of degree of control. But I absolutely take the overall point that very strong contract management on the side of the council is absolutely required in order not to let that slip, and that has to be throughout the duration of the contract.
Councillor Spate.
Yeah, just a quick question. Do you have the power within the contract when it's first written to stipulate what percentage? I get the workers might be more difficult because there are specialist skills that you may not be able to get, but certainly in terms of buying supplies, that you could set a figure down that says what you expect the contractors to spend within the borough. I mean, I know several businessmen who gnash their teeth and wail because they can't get supply contracts locally with the council and its contractors, and it frustrates them enormously. And the second question was, you mentioned those figures about workers. Is that the Mears workforce, or is that the whole consummate workforce of people who are engaged on doing the repairs? In other words, does it include the subcontractors and the subcontractors?
So the 55% is the Mears workforce, and the 36% is the suppliers based in Thurrock. So taking that approach of subcontractors, some of them will be in the bunt of the suppliers. There was a first bit of your question that I missed.
Chair, if I may. If I understand, Councillor Spate, you mentioned about the materials, how they source and purchase their materials, whether they can procure those locally from suppliers. Well, Mears currently already use plum-based here. Now, we can set an ambition and we can set a range. I wouldn't want to set a single figure, so I think you understand the concept. Let's go for 20 to 30% of all supplied materials. Now, for your standard routine construction materials, there's no reason why some of that cannot be sourced from within the authority, or within the borough, of course, depending on the specialist nature. So if we're looking for fairly complex parts and such like, we would have to be quite careful about stipulating that. There's no good setting up a framework, a contract, that's already going to trip the contractor over in terms of what they can deliver. So we'll have to be careful looking at that. Obviously, we have to do some market engagement to find out what type of supply sources are available within Thurrock before we start stipulating that this is where you get your timber, your plasterboard, your concrete and your cement and such like. We'll have to do some market engagement on that basis. Again, that comes down to being an intelligent client and having the right expertise to detail that within the product specification. In terms of, we do use the National Housing Federation product specification booklet in terms of what we use for all our repairs. So we will use part of that to say, can we source those materials that's put in the NHF that we can procure from within the borough, and then we can set that as part of the tender bid to any bidders who do want to work for Thurrock. That's where they're going to be sourcing the supply. So in short, yes, we should be able to stipulate that, but it'll be more of a range rather than a hard figure. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Edsall.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to see that people are in Thurrock and building comes from Thurrock. My worry is who follows up on the work being done, because surely that if we're employing MERS, we're employing contractors within Thurrock, as subcontractors, you said, I think, come from Thurrock, some of them. But we might be doing all those things, but what are we doing to follow up when the jobs are not being done? You know, who is doing that? Is MERS, as Councillor Spate said a little while ago, is MERS marking its own papers, you know? So I think we need to follow up a little bit more. I'd like to see a bit more of how it's working. You know, are the jobs being done? If they're not being done, why not?
Chair,
please.
For yourself. Just to set a broad context, there's over on average, over 1,000 repairs a month are carried out by MERS or their supply chain that they're responsible for. A lot has been said about the subcontractors. The performance of MERS will be judged against how they manage and deliver the works of their subcontractors, where they don't deliver it directly themselves. That is a built-in mechanism of the contract. So if it is, we've spoken a lot about subcontractors. I don't believe any members of this committee are saying subcontracting is bad. You just have some reservations as to how its performance managed. So that will be part of the mechanism. The current mechanism we have, Councillor Edsall, is that 10% of repairs are inspected where possible to make sure the work is carried out diligently to the right standard, using the right materials. Now, obviously, any work that is not carried out correctly that we do not inspect as a follow-up, as part of that 10%, MERS will always come back to us where residents are unhappy. You yourselves have submitted members' inquiries to myself and complaints from your constituents that we follow up on. And if MERS are found, or their supply chain is found wanting, that they have cut corners, they will be held accountable to that. So that is the process we have built within the contract. And our job here as officers going forward in the next 12 to 18 months, as Councillor Lydiard has mentioned, is to have a clear project plan, is to detail out how we'll achieve a much better service against the new contract and how we evidence that from any bidders that want to work for Thurrock. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, very briefly,
Just on, we did have problems quite a while ago, I don't know, before Evelina's time, I think, where we had people going out to jobs who couldn't speak English, and that was a very big, because they couldn't talk to each other, you know, the people in wherever they were going to couldn't speak the language, so the residents were having trouble, so that was coming back to us, and I think we've solved that sort of a little bit better, but those are the sort of things that happen. You know, so I think where we've met with MERS, we know that those things, hopefully, are not still happening.
I could add onto this. No, absolutely. I think even when I joined, I think you were telling me about those situations. So yeah, we absolutely are aware of those problems, and where they are, we try to address them. I mean, there's one other way, and it's a very important one for us, how we check on any contractor. I mean, we do run very stringent and very active tenant satisfaction surveys, where we go out and speak to residents. I mean, it's a telephone call or it's an online, and we obviously collect. So I just run, and we've got those Power BI dashboards, which I'm sure you saw before. We're very keen on sharing a bit more of that. So I've just run the stats over the last 10 months, so from the 1st of June of last year to now. Overall satisfaction with the repair service, we've got a target of 85%, and we've got at the moment, the last 12 months, 89.6. So this obviously is the satisfaction with the repair service. And then we break it further into keeping the appointment times, the quality of repair, the right first time, and keeping tenants informed around the repair service. So we really do look at it month on month. We've got scorecards, and we sort of add data on pretty much daily intervals, because some of those dashboards are already linked to our sort of live data. So, and Mia's absolutely taken to task. Core group, Sue will be joining us. We go religiously through those dashboards, and where things are dipping, because obviously we can see trends, we take Mia's to task. And I know we're focusing on Mia's, but we do that with other contractors as well. There is also there is a clause in the contract, I think, if there is on the trot the same KPI failing 3 months in a row, we then instigate improvement plan for that particular line of KPI. I think previously, I know probably a year and a half, I think mayors were dipping on 1 or 2, and it was at month 2 that they themselves said, well, actually, we're not going to wait for the 3rd month, this is what we're planning to do. So there is quite a stringent sort of scrutiny of that, and I think resident feedback through those satisfaction survey is probably the best way for us to measure. I mean, this is obviously the accepted measure, but it's the best way for us to measure. We also do the kind of word clouds to figure out what are the key things that when people are dissatisfied and are kind enough to give us a comment, then we pick out. We also make calls to them to kind of close that loop. So what is it that went wrong? And I totally see that when in the more complex repairs, so sometimes even things that don't necessarily appear complex to begin with, when they go wrong, they can absolutely go spectacularly wrong, and then they take time to put right. So it's very important learning for us and closing that loop. Thank you.
Councillor Spate?
Sorry, I did have one point, and it's now become 2 because of what you just said. I never understand why you set targets that might be 90%, because you can play with statistics all you like, but basically, and you've just said, you know, 9 out of 10 of customer satisfaction, or 87% is customer satisfaction. That means more than 1 in 10 are not happy, which if you walk up and down Gray's High Street on an afternoon, you're probably going to walk past 200 people. That means you've got to, doing the maths, 20 unhappy residents. It's just not acceptable. Every target should be 100%, in my personal view. I'll just make that point. The point that I was going to make was in general regarding procurement, and just as a salutary lesson as to why we want, and an explanation of why we want more accountability and more input. And it's the flats that sit behind us here in this building, where you've got a block of flats down at Seabrook and on Kilbert's Field, which basically have been an absolute embarrassment. And I won't name the company, but a complete and utter cock-up of immense proportions, costing fortunes, but more importantly, creating absolute hellish conditions for residents. How you can have a procurement system whereby you purchase and take cladding off and buy a whole load of new windows and go to install them and find out that they don't fit. And I don't think that procurement process is fit for purpose. So I hope that you discard any connection with whatever you're planning to put into the procurement process from what happened down in Grace, because we certainly don't want that to happen again. And when it does, or if it does happen, we don't want to see the secrecy and the collusion that has gone on, because nobody in the general public still knows what the hell happened down there, because it's been hidden, buried, and kept out of the public domain.
Any concluding comments, Evelina?
Just to say, obviously, we're not here to debate this matter, but just for the record, the windows were not ordered incorrectly, so that's a statement of fact. There was not such thing as incorrectly ordering windows.
Right then, if we're summing up, I think committee's kind of one mind that we want a working group on specifically the repairs issue. If we ask officers to take it away and recommend a time frame for which we should have discussions, and then perhaps just share some draft terms of references with us all to make sure that the group is going to go after the issues that we are interested in. Please.
if you want, I've just drafted a recommendation, if you wanted, and we'll use it as 1.1 and then change it to 1.2 for the same. So, for example, with 1.1 would say the Housing Overview and Scrutiny Committee recommend the formation of a working group to consult with officers and experts with a view to producing a report in advance of the procurement the procurement of a domestic and commercial gas serving breakdown repair installation contractor. Exactly the same for the other one, where you then do it as repairs and maintenance. So we have the working group. We agree to consult with people here and now. There's a specific recommendation that is what we do as a committee, and we ask officers to work a time frame. And the caveat to it all is it must be completed within 3 months.
Evelina?
So if I may, we'll take it away as officers and consider, and I think just also check with the monitoring officer whether this is a decision or whether that's something that we take away and recommend and come back to here, because I'm not entirely sure that the committee can make such a decision.
Well, we can't make we can make, we're empowered to make a decision on behalf of what our committee would like to see. Obviously, we can't bind Cabinet, so if Cabinet choose to make a different decision, they can, but committee is entitled to make its own recommendation in terms of what we want to do in terms of our workload. So I'm quite content with the recommendation. If someone wants a second.
Yeah.
Councillor, okay. All agreed?
Yeah.
Thank you. Right, if we skip over the work plan, if we go straight to the hostel management item, then we'll go back to the work plan at the end. It's not Councillor Johnson. Evelina? Hostel? Well, we've got the covering paper that allows us to talk about the principle, principle of the provision. But obviously, when we get on to actual contractual matters, the cost, duration, so on and so forth, that would have to be an exempt session. So if people are able to talk about the white paper first, which is the principle of the commissioning, before we actually speak about details, then we can cover the first bit without going into exempt session. If people are content. So Evelina, did you want to give us a brief overview?
I am absolutely happy to do that. I am a little bit concerned about the sort of debate of this item in public, but no, absolutely. So, executive summary. There is a provision at the moment that we're obviously looking to review and have a different provision. Obviously, again, this is another one of those where we would welcome feedback. What do you think that is needed from obviously your experience? Or your knowing of the residents out there that are coming to you. It is an opportunity to, as you know, across the adult health and housing, we have got a very ambitious strategy, Better Care Together Thurrock, where we're really looking to integrate a number of services, provide that more seamless sort of access to us, ensure that the resident doesn't have to repeat the story, that we can kind of see them as we find them. So this is also one of the opportunities to relook at the provision that we've got. Obviously, this particular contract covers not just hostels, it covers outreach for rough sleepers, it covers floating support and all of those matters. But I would really like, if we may, go into debate as a non-public item. Thank you.
Obviously, we can ask questions on the white paper specifically about the principle of it before we go into exempt session on the pink. So, Evelyn, on page 64, you talk about the operational risk of delivering large, complex services, which is obviously always a risk if you manage something yourself, always a risk if you bring it in-house. How do you assess whether or not we have the capacity to bring this in-house? What is the methodology that you go through to say whether or not, yes, I think we can manage this?
I think the best answer for that, an example, is the fact that we already run one hostel and we do it successfully. Obviously, I've got colleagues here with me who are more able to talk to the detail of that. But, you know, we have proven the concept, we can do it. It is not overspending, it's providing support. We do outreach from that place as well. We help that particular cohort to move on and actually get established, you know, something that we think we're quite good at. So that's why I think that we can. At the same time, not just hostel, but we have got our own RAF sleeper coordinator, again, a fairly successful number of interventions there and successful placements, and you know, working in that integrated way across the directorate with external health partners as well. We've got really good links to be able to offer that support, because those individuals that will be going into hostel in particular, or those that will be helped on the street, very often have got those complex needs.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I didn't ask if we can run the service in-house. I said, how do we assess our capacity? Because I understand Brook House is run pretty successfully. No financial concerns, no logistical concerns, but surely there's a tipping point at some stage where you say, we can manage Brook House, but then if you start to scale up, you bring more activity. At what stage do you start to say to yourself that there are now too many moving parts for us to actually manage? I mean, that must be an internal conversation, surely.
Yes, and I'm just trying to find a way of saying how we would do it if it's the more non-public sort of conversation. Obviously, taking anything in-house, you take it from the entity that is currently providing it, and with that comes a complement of staff that would then come across to the council. So it wouldn't be us having to set up a new team to run it. We would inherit a team that runs it very successfully, to be fair, by the current provider.
And you're confident that the you know, increased management burden, that's something that the existing structure, obviously you would inherit staff, but they would still have higher up line management burdens. You know, your staff complement would grow as a result. You're quite confident that that growth is something that can all be absorbed quite happily?
I think the sort of the work that is going on at the back of the delivering for the Better Care Together Thurrock gives us that framework where we're looking at integration and closer working together. So we have got other schemes that we're running, whether it's Housing First or whether it's Head Start Housing, that run a similar model, but obviously are perhaps under different management. So I think, yes, there is absolutely always opportunity to integrate even more and share those sort of experiences and skill that there is, whether it's managing people or whether it's managing the service provision.
Councillor Redsill.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, this is on white paper, so the first bit. You've got, we already run Brook House, Evelina. Are we allowed to ask where that is? Or have you put it down for a reason, didn't want to put down where it is?
Which button? Sorry, if I may, I'm Chris Wade, I'm the rehousing manager, so the hostel service largely comes under my remit. Some of the rough sleeper stuff comes under my colleague Bims, but Brook House is just in Brook Street, which is up the road in Grays. It's a female-only hostel designed to house only women and younger children. And yeah, it's a very successful unit. It runs financially neutral, and we've managed to integrate a lot of support into it. So it is running very well as a council-run hostel.
Could I just ask how you run it cost neutral?
Well, we obviously charge service charges and rents to the people who are there. We have limited staff that work on site. It's not a 24-hour provision at the moment. And the staff that are on site, some of the staff that work with the hostel have integrated roles across the service in the other parts of the TA management service, as well as income recovery officers and welfare support officers who work for various teams across housing. So we're able to use varying financial pots while also getting all of that money back. And we do maximise the income from the rents because of the level of support that we put in there for those women to ensure they're getting all the benefits they need to, and even with support in finding employment and education where needed.
Councillor Shinnick, then Councillor Yard.
I was just wondering if it would be beneficial to the committee to have a visit to Brook House and Charles Street, just so as we can see at first hand what goes on, because I've got no idea, you know, what goes on there. I don't know if that would be something we could do.
This is absolutely fine. I mean, we could add it to the... I'm sure we can add it to, you know, when we arrange that trip and visit one of those places.
I think that's a very good suggestion. Councillor Yard.
Thanks, Chair. Having a service brought in-house gives you the flexibility to do lots of things. But it also gives you the flexibility to cut it back severely. And I need reassurance that that is definitely not going to happen.
Absolutely. The sort of the cohorts that are going into those provisions very often require support, and that support is embedded in order to actually allow people to have the best sort of version of life that they want, and that they can kind of move on and get onto the next more suitable or more long-term property. So the support is really important for us in order to allow for that transition. So we wouldn't be looking to scale it down. As I say, it gives us an opportunity to integrate more and actually even get to that earlier, because then we would be the sort of the provider, the runner of the facility, and you know, we can tap into the existing support network that we've already got.
Oh, please.
If I could just add to that as well, obviously, as the executive summary says, some of the provision of services there is funded by DLUC. So the rough sleeper services, the housing first, that's funded by DLUC. So all of those positions, as long as the DLUC funding remains in place, there would be no plans to cut that back in any way.
Right, shall we wander into the exempt part now? Sorry? No, we can go to the exempt bit.